Hello and welcome to the Practical Leadership Podcast, where leaders share their tools and practical advice to make you a better leader today. My name is Max Kozlowski. I will be your host. And today we have a man that has leadership written all over him. He's been bridging cooperation between businesses, government, and legislature for more than 40 years. He's been named 100 most influential people in Texas government and politics. He's been recognized as one of the 24 most influential people in San Antonio. He's been named Corporate Executive of the Year. The list goes on and on and on. He is behind projects like the construction of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers Stadium, the AT&T Stadium here in San Antonio, now Frost Stadium. He's been an entrepreneur, top corporate executive. Now he's also a host of his own podcast called Beyond the Bite. We'll make sure to have access in a link for everyone so they can go take a look at that. I first met our guest today at a TEDx talk. And one of the things I was like engaging, surprising, interesting is how well he was able to communicate, connect with people, convey the message. And I still remember the talk perfectly. It had to do with population decline and the big challenges associated with it. And it's just a great example of someone that can see things from a macro perspective, can look at things that nobody else is paying attention to. And with that mindset and with that approach, he has been an advocate for businesses, for people, for the community. I can go on, but let's get into it. Eddie, it's so great to have you here on the show today.
Max, thank you for allowing me to join you for a little while to have a great conversation.
Yes, absolutely. I am so much looking forward to this. Eddie, before we jump into things, what's been something interesting, exciting, fun that's been happening in your world over the last, few weeks or months even?
Well, I would go back to the month of April, which is when I launched my podcast, Beyond the Bite. As you mentioned, it's about the intersection of business, public policy, and politics, and how they interact with each other at that intersection. Who has the right of way? And how do you avoid collisions in that particular environment? It's like with your podcast, it's been a labor of love and a true passion, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. It doesn't pay the bills, but I'm having a lot of fun with it.
It is fun, right? You get to have these wonderful conversations with these incredible guests that get to share their insight and knowledge. So the podcast, people, communication, that all seems to be part of your world, right? You engage and interact with, at the end of the day, humans to help convey messages and to help move things forward. But I'm always curious to ask my guests, where did this first come about? Where did you first learn about leadership or the concept of leadership as a whole? Or what was that like for you?
Well, my mother, if she were alive today, she would tell you it began at the age of 4 when I was interviewing family members with a hairbrush. And, I was a big fan of Walter Cronkite on the CBS Evening News. And eventually that led to my major in college being journalism, and then beginning in a journalistic career path before eventually jumping the fence into public relations, public affairs, and advocacy. So it was during the pandemic that I sort of began to analyze what was missing in my life and what would bring me joy. And I had 3 nonprofits ask me if I wouldn't mind moderating a Zoom virtual conversation with a state legislator. And I was happy to do it and volunteered my time. And it was during those 3 incidences that reminded me how much joy storytelling was missing in my life. And so that's what brought me back to storytelling through the podcast.
So it's incredible because everything that you've done in your career has been about conveying a story, telling a story, right? Because you have these big entities and they need to be communicated with. They need to be persuaded, influenced. They need to be able to see the big picture and the big ideas. and it all kind of stemmed from this interest in communication and communicating and in journalism. At what point did you connect the dots between communication and leadership? Because that's a typical thing we see. Great leaders many times are great communicators. How did those two things connect for you?
Lee Iacocca.
Okay.
When Iacocca was running Chrysler, I bought his book, and I just remember that back in the early 80s, Chrysler was suffering from the importation of a lot of inexpensive, predominantly Japanese vehicles. At that time, it was Datsun, the Nissan predecessor, and Toyota. And Lee Iacocca decided to tell people, if you can find a better car, buy it. But it was, he pushed that Buy American message that got people to go back and give a second look at Chrysler products. And you might also recall that at that time, Chrysler was approaching a bankruptcy, and he was able to get a bailout from Congress, but he paid it back so early, Congress didn't, or the government didn't know how to accept a multi-billion dollar check. But his ability to sell cars, sell ideas, win over the union to working as a partner, and then convincing Congress they needed to, because of all the jobs that were at stake. It wasn't just the Chrysler jobs at the plants, it was the jobs at Bendix Brakes that might be in a congressman's district far away from 1,000 miles away from the auto manufacturing plant. So his ability to tell a story and deliver a message, I always found very moving and very empowering.
There's a lot to talk about, when you think about someone like Lee Iacocca and what he was able to do and accomplish in his skills. But one of the things I'm interested in is your mindset. Your mindset is always about understanding who are the people that get impacted and who are the people that are going to either benefit or suffer from these decisions. And I think that most people can see maybe one or two layers, but you have this ability to kind of dig deeper and understand the ramifications of what gets done or doesn't get done. And how did you develop that? When did you say, hey, wow, I understand that, kind of like you were saying, Chrysler has an issue and it affects, Joe and his family that are 3 layers down because they're a vendor to this company and da-da.
I would say that came from elementary school when I learned to play chess. It's in chess, and it was also instilled in me by my parents, that you're always trying to think of your next 3 moves. It's not just your next move. It's what are the likely scenarios that occur in your second move, your third move, and the next move after that. I also learned from a previous boss that paranoia, if used correctly, can be a very valuable tool. Not scary paranoia, but the type of paranoia that says, someone's coming to see me. I wonder what they want. Will they have an ask for me? Do I owe them anything? Are they going to have any expectations of me? Is there a potential deal in the mix? Are they going to make me an offer? So that kind of good paranoia, which makes you go through that next 3 moves chess scenario every time someone comes to see you, or every time you get involved in a conversation. And I tell you what, the other thing I learned from him, because he actually surprised me one time when we met. I thought we were just meeting to have coffee and to catch up, and he made me a job offer at the end, and I was completely unprepared to respond or to negotiate because I hadn't gone through that 3-step process yet. And so from that point forward, I learned with everything, be thinking much further ahead.
Wow, that is some excellent advice. reminds me of a Great by Choice, one of the Jim Collins books, where he talks about 10x leaders. And one of those attributes is this positive paranoia. So kind of having your mind thinking about all the possible outcomes, situations that might come up, issues, challenges, opportunities. So you can kind of have somewhat of a plan, or have been able to process those ideas before. And to me, that's the ultimate definition of being proactive and not
It is.
reactive, because you're ready for potential possible outcomes.
Well, and too often what I see in poor communications is people who are listening to respond instead of people who are listening to understand. And if you've already gone through the thought process, the goal isn't to win the argument. The goal is to figure out, how do you take your conversation to the next level? How do you continue this? Or how do you do a business deal? How do we get to the point where we both feel comfortable working with each other? And sometimes it doesn't happen on the first meeting. And so you have to figure out how to stay in touch with people. One of the things, a habit that I picked up years ago was I happen to like fountain pens. And I really appreciated getting a handwritten note from people. And I decided, I've been doing this for 30 years, handwriting notes, but especially today in a technology-driven world where people text and email, getting a little handwritten thank you card for something someone did, or for when you meet someone for the first time, can make a true impression. And so I always look for those opportunities. I'm not selling anything. It's just an extra little added touch to be able to say, I think enough of you to write a handwritten note.
Okay, so that opens up a whole new conversation. But before I wrap that one up, because this idea of listening to respond versus listening to understand, it's so simple but so difficult, right? If more people really listen to understand and less to win the argument or get their way, I think the world would be a much better place. Why do you think we struggle with that so much? Why do you think as people, as humans, as a society, we're trying to figure out what to say all the time and get our way?
I think it stems from wanting to win, and B, wanting to you have knowledge that you really want to impart on someone else. But what gets lost in that process is, to many people, you can go much further if the person you're speaking to feels like you're truly listening. It's not that you can win an argument almost easier by listening to understand than by spewing out facts that you're trying to win over this person, or to get them to come over to your side of an issue. So we have a tendency, I think, as humans, to sometimes get stuck in that trap. And it's fascinating when you watch people truly appreciate the fact that you are listening, and you're not antsy, you're not trying to jump in and interrupt because you've got something to say. I think the more calm you are and the more patient you are, the more people tend to appreciate it.
Two thoughts come to mind. One is the importance of having people that are really knowledgeable in their field, because there's so many misconceptions. There's so much stuff out there that actually goes against reality, right? These preconceived notions or thoughts, the irrationality of our minds. So I can just imagine, like, when I think about your expertise, and when somebody would just try to do something by themselves instead of hiring you to go and talk to governments, to try to influence legislature, etc., all the misconceptions and all the mistakes that they're going to make versus knowing how to approach it. On the speaking slowly, there's some real research and evidence the fewer words you speak, the slower your pace, the more time you take to say what you have to say, you actually have more credibility. When somebody shows up and goes really fast and tries to tell you all these things, they are actually putting themselves in a, I like to use the word beta position, right? Because they're like, hey, there's not enough room for me. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough space. So I better try to say everything that I want to say quickly. So again, there's also some science that backs that up. So I love to hear.
Well, Max, and you said at the outset that we met at the TEDx San Antonio event. And what's interesting about that whole process is that I'm also a big believer in trying to learn something new every day, no matter how long you've been doing this, no matter how good you are at something, there's always room for improvement. There's always, I'm losing the author's name, but the one that wrote the book about the four squares, it's urgent but not important.
Probably.
Stephen Covey, thank you. So, one of the things that he talks about is how to focus on the important but not the urgent. And during the TED event, I had a PowerPoint that was 60 pages long, filled with bullet points. And one of the TED rules is you can't have more than 10 slides, and bullet points are forbidden. And each slide had to convey a single image or a single thought. And so, try as I might to edit my 60-page PowerPoint, my brother's the one that finally convinced me, throw it away, start completely over, and think of it from a fresh perspective, which is what I did. And that's when I truly was able to kind of greatly enhance the way I talked about immigration, population decline, and where we're headed.
Yeah. Well, again, I think that the quality of your communication that day was second to none. And I know that that is consistent in every interaction that we have. So let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
When you think about working with people, because at the end of the day, you work with people, whether they're on your team or they're on the other side of the aisle, what is your mindset? What is your approach to get the most out of people, to get the best out of everyone?
Well, I tell you what, leadership comes in many different forms, and I've learned a lot of lessons over the years. One of them, especially when you own your own business, this is my third business. And the first one that I started, I made the assumption that the first employee that we hired was as motivated as I was and would work as hard and as late as I would, but it wasn't her business. I mean, she was an extremely hard worker, but it reminded me that there's different ways to motivate people, and learning how to work with a variety of different people. Some are introverts, some are extroverts. Some, if you scold someone or tell them they did something wrong or there's a better way to do something in the future, they kind of cringe and curl up and just want to, go home. There are others that are motivated and they like that direct approach. And so it's understanding your team members and then figuring out how to motivate them based on their needs and their personalities. And then, when I speak to leadership classes, I like to remind them leadership comes in a wide variety of forms. When Ivy Taylor was mayor of San Antonio, she came to me and asked me for help in getting a federal courthouse. For 8 years, they had tried to get it done and they were unsuccessful. And we quickly went to work, found out that Senator Shelby from Alabama was coming to San Antonio for an event. We were able to get an hour of his time because he was on the Senate Appropriations Committee. We were able to talk to him about the courthouse funding that we needed, and we explained that we hadn't made any progress as a city. And then when he found out that we only wanted 125 or 135 million instead of the $500 million that he thought we were going to ask for, he said, well, that's easy, we'll get it done. You know, you need to invite this other senator down here. He chairs the subcommittee on which courthouses get ranked in order to get funding for. We did that, and then we stayed in touch with his office, and a few months later we got the funding for the federal courthouse. Now, when you watch the press conference of, you know, announcing the funding, there were a lot of politicians at that press conference. I was not there. I didn't need to be there, and that's why I tell them leadership is always about doing the right thing regardless of who gets the credit. The goal was not to make sure that I or my employer got credit for the role we played. The goal was to get the funding for the courthouse, which is what was achieved.
That is so critical, right? Like we seek the fame, the fortune, the recognition, and actually end up hurting ourselves more than by just committing to the outcomes and having the results that are going to end up benefiting us all. So I'm going to go a little deeper on this idea of understanding what motivates people, because I think that's like one of the ultimate tools in leadership. So one thing is to understand what motivates and drives your team members, and I'm curious to hear about some of the ways that you do that. And then a second is to understand how to motivate the people that are outside of that, because sometimes you need to motivate your clients, sometimes you need to motivate your government, sometimes you need to motivate your kids, right? So I'm curious on your approach to understanding what it takes to learn what motivates people.
I think, you know, when I went to work for a bank, they asked me to take this test, and it tells you, so it's a color-coded test. You know, red shows you're a good, quick decision maker. You have no problems making executive decisions. Yellow is someone that's an extrovert, someone that's good with people, so a red yellow is a great person to be in sales, or in my case, advocacy. I had an assistant at the time who was a blue-green. Blue was someone that was extremely well organized. Green was someone that was very quick to have empathy for other people, and someone who doesn't like a conflict. And so I quickly figured out why, once I saw her test scores, why whenever I went and said, hey, I don't think this worked very well, maybe we should try it differently, I had to use more positive language than saying, hey, you messed up on this. So, because that sounds like you're being scolded, versus, hey, let's try it a different way next time and see if that might work. So it's really interesting. In this case, I had a tool to use to understand the types of motivation that certain people needed, or the language to use so that no one felt hurt or offended. And it allowed me to do those different things. In the case, we have 3 kids. They're 25, 22, and 19 now. And yes, over the years, like other people's kids, they're all different. They're all motivated by different things. So they all required something a little bit different. You know, the one size fits all policy doesn't work. So I've learned a lot over the years from management, from owning a business, from being a parent, and just in service to the community. When you sit on a board, you know, how do you get your fellow board members to come along with you to understand there's some danger up ahead? Before we start spending a lot more money, perhaps we should, you know, pull back a little bit in case that storm does come this way, because looks like it's headed this way. So how do you get people to do that? And in many cases, it's not at the group setting, because at the group setting, it's a little too late. So in many cases, you have to have those one-on-one meetings to measure everyone so that you get a sense before you even get to the next board meeting.
That's great. That's great advice. So well, first thing is that I get reminded of this idea that managers play checkers and leaders play chess, right? Understanding people are complex, and they have different knowledge, skills, abilities, values, and recognizing them allows you to do the best for them, which in turn gets the most from them. And you use tools and technology, because
Yes.
there's a lot of great tools out there. So use a tool or a combination of tools. They generate a lot of insight and knowledge and information that can be very well leveraged. And then I like the one-on-ones idea. I think that people believe that, we see this on TV and in movies, the big board meeting, and somebody stands up and gives this emotional speech, and then everybody buys into the idea. But what I know is that the cooperation happens, more on a one-on-one basis, more of a couple of people to a couple of people to spend the time to get the understand what drives, motivates people. And then that's when you start to put these pieces together. And as you're saying, right, get a sense of where people are, convey the messages. Then you get to the board and where people are and where people stand, and you could kind of do the final push there. Is that kind of
Yes.
what I understand?
Exactly. You're exactly right. There's a different dynamic. Sometimes people like to posture when they're in a group setting, and the group dynamic is different. Some people feel peer pressure, or they don't want to embarrass themselves, or they don't want to stick their neck out first. They want to see if someone else is going to stick out their neck and suffer whack-a-mole hammer. And so that's why the one-on-one dynamic works very well.
I got to tell you just a quick story on my entrepreneurial journey. I used to work for corporate as well, and we would have meetings about the meetings before the meeting, and then there were meetings to align people before the alignment meeting. And I just looked at that and I'm like, this is the biggest waste of time. We're having a meeting so we can have a conversation and get alignment on that meeting. And I just thought everything was a waste of time. And then, I'm like, I gotta show these people how you really do things. But ultimately what you're saying is true, right? There's only so much you can do, because group dynamics will have a big sway and influence people in ways that are more difficult to manage and control and influence. And there is the importance of all that work with those one-on-ones, those meetings, those conversations.
The other thing, Max, that you always have to remind yourself of is you're not in someone else's shoes. You don't know what they're going through. They may have just lost a child, or just lost a parent, or lost a sibling. They may be going through financial difficulties. They're struggling with a child who's not doing well in school for some reason. And so all those things, that's why the one-on-ones are good, because sometimes some of that comes out and you're more understanding of why they're not necessarily on board or on the program or on the same sheet with the rest of the team. And, that's why it's not a good idea just to, scold people or get after people. It's to sit down and say, hey, what's going on? Why are you so far behind from the rest of the team? Why are you not helping to pull the wagon? And then that's when you often find out about something important in their life that's can be very traumatic. And so it's not that they're not doing their job, they're a little distracted. So it's a good way to dig a little deeper.
I really do believe in the importance of connecting with people and understanding their context, right? Understanding kind of their world and what's happening in it. There's a couple of different things that I want to ask you, but let me go after the tougher one.
Okay.
So there's a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners among our viewers,
Mhm.
and one question that I get asked often is, okay, yes, they are going through some personal issues. Where do I draw the line between their personal issues in affecting their performance or even affecting the well-being of the team? What is your approach to try to kind of mitigate some of the challenges that can happen with, people going through life?
Well, I guess a couple of things. A, it depends on the circumstance of what it is they're overcoming. And B, if in the case of a divorce or a separation, and there's children involved, and that disrupts their schedule because now they have to leave earlier. There are some things perhaps that you can do as an employer to help them through certain things. If it's something smaller, like a temporary financial hit, maybe you can, if they're getting a bonus, maybe you can give them a part of their bonus a little earlier so they can spend $500 to get their car fixed and they can get to work on time. So it just depends on what the situation is. But obviously, and it depends on how much time you, as the employer or the manager, how much time you have to spend on that problem and how invested is that employee in the business. Is there a longer history of issues? If there is, maybe it's not a good fit. And maybe it's an opportunity to say, hey, I'm happy to help you through your issue, but I'm not sure this is the place for you because it's a high stress environment. And it sounds like you have a high stress household that's been affecting you for many, many years. So that's the challenge.
I really like that approach. I mean, you kind of told it in a story form, but I like the idea, the model, right? So what is the context that the person is experiencing? What's their life situation? Then looking back and looking at their history, right? Their track record. I think that will be really, really important. Regardless of that, you're trying to help. You're trying to figure out what you can do to help them be in a better position or in a better circumstance, and recognizing the different issues and challenges that they have. And then you've got to kind of match that up with the needs of the team and the needs of the company, as well as the need of that individual. And that's where you have to help them make some difficult decisions, right?
No, exactly. And the other time, I've had some friends and colleagues refer to a previous employer of mine as a people collector. And once I saw how he operated, I realized that's what he did. He fell in love with people and brought them on. And it wasn't their skill set necessarily, but he saw something in them that made them valuable to his company. Sometimes he might have to move them 3 or 4 times from department to department to figure out, now they can finally soar, and I'm watching them soar. And sometimes you might have a great employee, but they may be in the wrong department, or they may be not fully utilizing their skill sets. So sometimes it's trying to, and maybe for that employee who's struggling, maybe they need a less stressful job within the company. Maybe they're willing to do something in today's world now, to do something hybrid so that they can go pick up their kids at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So it just depends, but there are different ways to look at it.
So to me, you just hit on one of the points of why scale, why grow your business, right? Why make it large? And I think that the one of the things I always say, it's because of the opportunities that it provides. And you're just describing that, right? If you have a business that has 10, 20, 30, 40 employees, there's only so many that you can collect or keep. You're going to need expertise, you're going to need performance out of people, and you're not going to have a lot of chance to get strikes, because that's going to cost you and slow you down. But there's a certain scale where you can afford the opportunity to try to, give people the opportunity to be in the right place, use their skill set, use their knowledge, and help the company, but by them matching the position with their skills and abilities. And you don't get to do that if you're small. So I kind of like that, but also recognizing the challenges that not every company can do that. Not every company can afford to wait and spend the time and the money, because you actually end up not helping anyone. The individual is
It,
in a place where,
yeah, and you have to balance. A lot of times it's very easy to say, okay, it's time for you to go. But then how much time, energy, and effort are you going to have to put into training someone new? And there's always that balance. I've been a part of companies that believe, it's better to retrain you or to coach you or to mentor you. But if they truly see and value your value to the company, then it's a lot of coaching, mentoring, checking in. There was a lot of checking in. There were some companies that didn't check in until the pandemic because people started leaving because they weren't happy. And so that's when a lot of companies said, you know what, let's just check in with everyone and find out one-on-one private meetings. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Are you still happy here? Do you have any intention of leaving? What can we do as an employer to convince you to stay or to help you continue to grow? And so, I mean, frankly, we need to be doing that on a regular basis and not just during the pandemic.
yeah, I agree. To me, it's one of the best practices is this idea that every manager needs to connect every week with every one of their reports one on one. And just for the audience, I think that one of the reasons why we don't do that is because we think that every meeting is supposed to last an hour. And I find that consistently, right? People think about a meeting, they think about an hour, and I'm like, no, no, no. A check-in can be 20 minutes or 15. So stop thinking about it as you have to, So I really like that point. You made another very, very valuable point, which is understanding the cost of replacing someone. So the cost of hiring, cost of training, cost of ramping up, but there's also a cost on the morale of the team when somebody has to leave.
Definitely. And because it's not just training them to do their skill set, but it's also getting them in line with your corporate culture, getting them to understand your 10 commandments, getting them to follow and be self-motivated rather than having to be pushed and pulled, to do things. And so there's a very heavy cost. Again, the onboarding to do the actual skills of the job may not be so hard, but in many cases it's the corporate culture and a sense of, especially for those companies that follow a culture of servant leadership, being kind and respectful to your coworkers, and then volunteering your time to give back to your community. That's hard to measure sometimes. So, but there's a big cost to replacing an employee.
Yeah. One of my clients says, you still have to show them where the bathroom is. Right. So
Yes.
everybody needs to learn. So absolutely understanding the So this is one of those where if you're not doing it, this is your opportunity to understand that you have to do it and do it well. So you got to teach people the culture, as you called it, your commandments or your pillars, your values,
Right.
how you do things, the mindset, and you're explaining some I believe of yours, which has to do with this expectation of independence, being able to make decisions, being able to take action, not having to wait for anyone, which sounds like a great place to work if you're going to be empowered like that. So let's see. I'm curious to hear or understand a little bit more about, through all of these experiences and all these different organizations and in your consulting company, what are some of these, as you call it, commandments or pillars that are so important for you, that you think that people need to understand them, and if you're going to succeed here with your company, they're going to need to either learn or have as they come in? I'm curious.
I think one of them is to always help your colleagues, your coworkers. And this became extremely evident during the pandemic and continues today, because when you have employees who are working remotely 100%, they're not running into people at the water fountain. They're not running into people at the break room, or they're not going out to lunch with their coworkers. And especially learning from the more senior members, the more experienced members of the team. Hey, I noticed you did this. That was great. But next time you do that, try it slightly differently and doing it this way. I have found in my years of experience that works, and customers value that. So getting that great expertise, the seasoned experience from the more senior members of the team, that got disrupted when people were working from home. And you don't have, I can't think of growing up all the times I learned on every job I've ever had from somebody who had been there a lot longer than I had. And all the times I went to them and said, why am I struggling with this? And they would say, well, you're doing it wrong. Try it this way. And for these reasons. And I would try it that way. And all of a sudden a light bulb goes off. And it's like, oh, no wonder. So I think that is something that's missing. And in the work from home hybrid environment today, the two colleagues coming together and helping each other. But back to your question about pillars or commandments. So one of them, I think, is help your fellow colleague. Number two is listen to understand. I helped a nonprofit have a retreat, and there were two colleagues. One of them was resentful that the other one kept asking for help. By the end of the retreat, the male colleague went up to the female colleague and said, I am so sorry that I never answered the call of duty when you kept asking me for help, because I resented you asking me for help, because I thought you and I were doing the same thing. Now I realized you seem to be doing twice as much work as I am, and I feel guilty that I didn't help you. So from this day forward, when you come and ask me for help, I'll always be there for you. So that kind of, getting out of the office, letting your hair down a little bit if you have hair, and being able to understand you're at your most persuasive when you're speaking from the listener's frame of reference. And if you can't understand where they're coming from or understand their perspective, you're not going to be able to help each other. So it's important to understand where they lie, where everyone falls into what category. But another one is,
Let me before you jump into the next one, because there's so much meat on each of these that I just want to ask you a couple more questions.
sure.
I really like this idea of helping your team members and how COVID has made it more difficult because all these collisions that you used to have at the water cooler or at lunch or walking the halls is no longer there. So as you lose these collisions, you're losing this transfer of knowledge and information and communication. I remember perfectly in my corporate days, some of the biggest innovation that I either had or helped others develop came from these interactions. And then as an entrepreneur, it is a very different dynamic, right? You have to go to conferences, you have to pick up the phone and talk to people you don't know, and you have to do things very differently.
Yes.
But it sounds like you're asking people to be proactive about helping others. Do you have some mechanisms, very like the specific things that people can do to figure out how they can help others, or how even ask for help, which is my follow-up to that?
The one thing I remember the first time I started a business was, if you sit and wait by the phone, it's never going to ring. So I knew that I had to go and sell myself. And then when I landed a corporate job, my boss said, don't ever eat lunch by yourself. Spend every day at lunch talking to someone, recruiting people, asking how you can help them, helping someone solve a particular problem, even if it doesn't benefit you. Trying to one of the things I like doing is connecting people. I'll know this person, and then I meet this person, and then I realize, you know what, these two people need to meet. It doesn't involve me, and I don't get anything out of it, but I think they can probably help each other out. So I like connecting people, because I think, and in most cases, it turns out to be a very good thing.
So you've got to be open to helping others. That's kind of rule number one. I think there's an element of how much satisfaction it gives you, because I believe that every time you make one of these connections, you get a lot of satisfaction from it. It makes you feel good to see the value that's being added in the world. So then it comes even deeper to this selflessness, right? And
Yes.
wanting to see others succeed. So you got to create these mechanisms. On the second point, you talked about listening to understand, and we talked a little bit about this earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned a very specific thing I see happen all the time. People are afraid of asking for help, whether because they are afraid of looking weak, just to call it something, or because they feel somebody's going to reject or resent them for asking for help. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that? Right? I actually think that you've got to be strong to be able to ask for help. But yeah, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
So one of the things I learned 40 years ago, there was a point in time where I was looking for a job, and in the 1980s, and what I discovered was, when you call someone and you're saying, hey, I'm looking for a job, you get one reaction. If you call someone and say, you have time for lunch, I want to pick your brain on something, everybody's quick to say, absolutely, tell me where and when, and I'll be there, because everyone wants to give advice. So both of those approaches are headed towards the same result. You're looking for a job. But when you ask people, I'm looking for a job, can we meet for lunch? Sometimes you turn them off because, like, well, I don't have a job for you. I don't have time for this. But when you ask them, I want to pick your brain on something, everyone loves to have their advice sought after. So 9 times out of 10, they're going to say yes. And that's where you tell the story of what you're trying to do. It's a totally different approach. But again, it's how you communicate it to people. And it's fascinating to see the different responses that you get. And at the time, I remember calling a friend of mine. We used to speak. I was in Austin at the time, and he was in Washington, D.C. And we used to speak once or twice a week. And we were longtime friends, and we would just tell jokes, or he'd update me on some mutual friends and where they had gone or what jobs they had taken. And because we spoke regularly, and I wasn't asking him about a job, he knew I was looking for a job, but I didn't bring it up because he would probably be shy about taking my call. He finally called me one day and said, "Oh my gosh, I just heard about this great job. You have to call this guy." And I called, got an interview, and then I got the job. And it was a newly created position for Director of Public Affairs for the National Turkey Federation. So I was the one that was going to the White House to take the live birds for the president to pardon. And so, but it's how I was communicating with my friend and staying in touch with him on a regular basis that led that opportunity, because you always have to remind yourself, out of sight, out of mind. He's halfway across the country. He doesn't think about me on a regular basis. So if we're just staying in regular touch with each other without talking about jobs, then maybe I'll be fresh on his mind when he hears of an opportunity, and lo and behold, there it was.
I love that. I'm sure somebody said this before Pitbull did, but in his song, right? He has this lyric where ask for money, get advice, ask for advice, get money twice. So, but if you've been paying attention to the conversation, it's all about understanding people and their motivators and their drivers. So if you call asking for a job, you're asking for something. They got to give you something.
Yes.
When you call and make them feel good, right? Because now you're asking for their advice, which makes them feel good. It makes them feel like you're giving them an opportunity, and it doesn't feel like a give. It feels like I'm sorry, it doesn't feel like you're asking. It feels like you're giving them an opportunity to give, if that makes sense.
Exactly. Yes.
and then that just changes the whole dynamic. Except don't do that to a consultant, because you have to pay for that, right? Yeah, we can talk about that some other day. And then some other time we got to talk about taking the turkeys to the White House to get pardoned. I'm sure that's an episode in itself.
It is.
Eddie, there's so much we can continue to talk about. We're starting to get a little bit short on time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick summary of everything that we've discussed. At the end of the summary, okay, I'm going to let you share whatever I might have missed, or whatever other things that you feel that our audience needs to hear from you, and or that you haven't had a chance to share yet, and then we'll kind of get into our closing. So there's so much stuff here that it might be more than a minute. So, but here I go. So I think one of the things that was interesting to me is that you started with journalism, the being able to communicate what is happening out there in a way that it was engaging and relevant and interesting to people, and then that led you to public relationships. But that kind of storytelling has always been there, and the communication part has always been there, right?
Yeah.
You admired Lee Iacocca in Chrysler for his turnaround ability, but also his ability to challenge, get the most out of people, and create real change through words and influence, and not just leaving it there, but really seeing it in action and kind of like seeing the consequences of all of it. You talked to us about the importance of playing chess in your development, and how you always had to be thinking 3 moves ahead, looking at likely scenarios, challenges, opportunities, and how that has stuck with you, and you are always looking ahead, and you have this positive paranoia in questioning the issues, the challenges, the possibilities, and being able to prepare for some of those, and ultimately being proactive and not just responsive to whatever's thrown your way. We talked a lot about the importance of listening to understand versus listening to respond, and how both science proves it, and it's not very helpful to listen to try to respond, because you don't get to be on the other person's shoes, which is so critical, being able to understand their opportunities, their challenges, their context. You gave us a great piece of advice, handwritten notes, talking about practical advice. That's such a simple one, yet so powerful one. It communicates so much and it means so much to people to do that. So, note taken on that. Don't communicate to win, communicate to understand. I think that's powerful, because then that's how you can build a common ground in the direction. Always ensure that you're learning something new every day. Working on the important and not just the urgent. I think those are just great pieces of advice for everyone, right? Going back to Covey and his framework, and the big idea there is that we're always trying to do what's urgent and what needs to be done right now, and you need to learn to put that to the side so you can really do the work that is important, which is going to take us to one of the next steps, which is the importance of these one-on-ones. But before I do that, you got to understand people and what motivates them. Understand their style, what drives them, how they operate, what their skill set is. And you've got to think about doing what is right, regardless of who gets credit. That's like a general leadership concept that was kind of intertwined in there. But going back to people, if you talk to them to understand, and you understand what motivates them, what drives them, whether it be your team or be people out there, then you can connect with them better. When it comes to your team, you can use tools. There's a lot of different profile technologies out there. Use them. They're going to be very helpful. Do one-on-ones. So one-on-ones was a great conversation, because there's a one-on-one with your team, but there's also the one-on-one with people that you're going to try to get consensus from and influence. So, we talked a little bit about how you see the big board meeting and you think that that's where the magic happens, but in reality, the magic is happening behind the scenes in all these different conversations, in all these different interactions. Recognize the difference between group dynamics versus one-on-ones. Going back to the point, right? You're not in somebody else's shoes. So you've got to be able to put yourself in their shoes. So it's very consistent with listening to understand. And consistently throughout our conversation, Eddie, it's about understanding and understanding and understanding, and really taking your time to understand. So then you can understand the context when it comes to your team members. And if there's a difficult situation and you got to figure out what to do with your team members, you got to understand the context, look at the history of the relationship and their performance, help them, and then understand what your team needs, what the company needs, and try to make the best decision for both. And you've got to make sure that people are in the right place in the organization, right? We talked a little bit about how you don't necessarily want to be a people collector, but you can warrant yourself the opportunity if your company's a little bit larger and you have the opportunity to match people that fit your culture with the positions that best fit them.
It's a lot easier to teach skills than culture.
A lot easier to teach skills than it is culture. And that's why I'm sure, people, successful leaders like to keep people, because they're like, if they are the right fit culturally and my company is large enough, I can find a place where they can contribute. And also, you talked about the cost of replacing people. There's economic cost. You need to hire and retrain and develop. So really important to keep that in mind. You got to teach them your culture. You got to teach them your commandments, and that also takes time. One of the values that we got to talk about from you and your team is that importance of helping others and being proactive about helping others, and how these COVID years have really changed that dynamic. So you've got to ensure that you put on the mechanisms to ensure that there's collaboration, communication, and help. And then we talked about how it's not everybody wants to ask for help. Not everybody is comfortable in being asked for help either. Right? So, you really shared it with this idea of, asking for something versus giving something first. And another important point, out of sight, out of mind. So you've got to be present and you've got to be around those people that you want to get help from, support from, and that you want to help as well. So a lot of what our conversation has to do with being in front of people, listening, understanding, and caring about people, and then helping them get what they want. There's a whole lot more. That's a little bit about kind of the notes that I got about today. What have I missed, Eddie, either from the notes or anything else that you feel like, our audience needs to hear?
Well, one of the things that my father instilled in me was just read everything you can get your hands on. And he used to read, 6 or 7 newspapers a day. Every morning for me, when I get up at 6 o'clock, before I even jump in the shower, I get on the computer and I scan all the outlets for news. And my father's thought was, you need to learn how to be a good conversationalist. And if you're ever stuck in an elevator with someone, you never know, they could be a future employer. And if they bring up a topic, you should be able to have some conversation with them about that topic if you're a good reader. My mother, whenever they had dinner, they had a lot of dinner parties. She would never put the husband and wife sitting next to each other. She wanted them to meet different people and get to know different people. She also instilled in me, I used to be a quitter. When I was 5, 6, 7, if I didn't get my way or I wasn't winning a game, I'd want to take my basketball or my marbles and take them home. And she kept telling me, don't be a quitter, don't be a quitter. And, now from a business standpoint, there is no greater joy than when you want to give up and you don't, and you just keep pressing forward, and then you get to the other side. It is so rewarding because it was worth a little bit of the pain. And too often it's very easy to say, I don't want to do this or I don't want to do that. But those are just a few of the things. As we all know, we learn more from our mistakes and our failures than we do from our victories and our successes. So making mistakes is a good thing because you learn not to do that again, and you learn to try it a different way. So accept your mistakes, accept your faults and your flaws, and never stop working on yourself or your team members.
Wow, that is powerful stuff right there. Worth another podcast right there. The importance of being a good communicator and being able to be able to talk to anyone in any situation, under any condition, and being able to relate. That is a powerful skill set. Eddie, before I let you go, what is something good, positive, fun that's coming up here in your life soon that you'd like to share?
Well, I've got our oldest son is working full time. The middle child, he just graduated from UT Austin and is now starting a 1-year master's program at St. Mary's. So we're excited about that. And he's back here in San Antonio. And then our youngest daughter, she just started her sophomore year at UTSA. And so when you go back and you think of the emotional event when you drop your kids off at college and all those questions go through your head, did we instill the right values in them? Did we get them prepared? To see them now as adults and to see them engage in conversations and taking on many of the attributes that we may not have taught, but they mimicked from us or picked up from us, it's a beautiful thing. So we're very happy.
That is very, very cool to hear. So where can people find you? Where can people find you? Also your podcast, where can they go listen to it? Can you give us a few bits so they can know where to go?
Absolutely. So the podcast is called Beyond the Bite with Eddie Aldrete. It's on all the major podcasting platforms. And we just released our 13th episode with State Representative Dustin Burrows about the Death Star bill that passed in the legislature. Prior to that, we sat down with San Antonio City Manager Eric Walsh to talk about the city budget. Coming up next is CPS Energy CEO Rudy Garza to talk about where CPS is. And we're going to be doing more profiles of business leaders, more conversations about difficult topics regarding business and public policy. I'm easy to find. I'm on all the major platforms, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, so you can pretty much find me anywhere.
Excellent, Eddie. I can't wait to listen to the new episodes. You tackle the subjects that are affecting our community or will affect our community. Subjects that if people don't know about, then they're going to left wondering how did it happen, right? Whether it's voting for a bill or supporting a cause or understanding what's happening, how our tax dollars are being spent. You make it visible for all of us, and I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. One of the greatest compliments I got was when someone said, before your podcast, we used to sit around and wonder what was being said, or what was happening on this particular issue. And now you're letting us know about the same conversations that we're having. So, and then another person I interviewed, restaurateur Louis Barrios, when we were done, he said, Eddie, that was just like one of our normal conversations, except there happened to be a microphone in the room. So as you full well know, Max, because of what you do with this podcast, it's a labor of love. It's great to converse with people, to learn from other people. And it's been a blast, and I'm having a great time with it.
Well, excellent. I'm sure we all look forward to hearing about more of those successes, hearing about more conversations, and continuing to see what you work on next and how you help transform our community, the state, and the country. So really appreciate all you do. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. We look forward to talking to you again.
Max, thank you. And I have greatly enjoyed this podcast. I've seen the episodes with Lisa Fullerton and Preston Woolfolk and several others. And so it's a great example, because you don't always have one source that you can go to learn about leadership, and you are providing that. So thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you again. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Max.